Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What are shadow people? How about the Hat Man? Are they entities? Are they and entities like them good, bad, or indifferent? Pay attention, Paul.
Hey, it happens to the best of us. Welcome to the 907th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Coming to you live from WOON AM and FM radio here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live and on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those shadowy questions came from my co-host, partner in paranormal adventures, and dad, Paul. And today we welcome back an old friend on a pretty remarkably strange subject.
Which we deal with anyway, but especially this one.
Yeah.
Heidi Hollis has researched unsolved mysteries for over 20 years. Over the years, and as early as 1997, Heidi coined terms like shadow people, the Hat Man, and others. In her many books, she tries to bring the ordinary and the extraordinary to her audience on a comfortable level where they can be discussed frankly and openly. Using her skills as an author, researcher, and even a cartoonist, Heidi ties into her own personal, paranormal experiences to bring us books like I See Shadow People and the Hat Man, a guide on how to get rid of them for all ages. Today, we go deep into subjects like this. Heidi is a regular in shows like Coast to Coast AM with George Nuri. Her websites include the blog ficklefinders.com. And, of course, there's HeidiHollis.com. We'll talk more about those later.
Indeed. So, Heidi Hollis, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you, guys. How have you been?
Hey, we're...
better than nothing.
Yeah, we're doing well, I think.
Awesome. That's great.
So I guess we'll just kind of hop right into it. So for those who do not know, what are shadow people and who is the Hat Man?
So, shadow people are these shape-shifting creatures that are darker than darkness. People would describe it as being absent of light. And they appear as something as simple as almost looks like a bat passing you, but it goes so quickly, or a shadow cloud or a shadow rodent. And then it can also take form to look more like a spider, so shadow spider. And then something that I called head and shoulder shadow, which are these massive things that could kind of look like a person with its head directly connected to its shoulders and may show glowing red eyes. And absolutely menacing to witness. And they can be anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall, or I've heard of bigger even. And one of their favorite things to do are to pin people down and make people feel as if their life is near over. I mean, they're suffocating the people. They growl. They do whispers, but I don't know them to really clearly talk to people much, if ever. And, so these things are seen right alongside of alien beings sometimes. And it's just a horrible, horrible presence to have, and are always around any kind of severely haunted location.
So I guess that kind of brings us to our next question, which is, in your book, The Hat Man, The True Story of Evil Encounters, you talk about your first sort of meeting with a shadow person in 1990 while you were walking with a friend. Can you tell us about that, and what did it do to your perception of reality?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I grew up in a haunted house, so I wasn't that unfamiliar with seeing things out of the ordinary, but seeing something like this in broad daylight. So what was going on, my friend and I were walking to our uncle's house, and I saw this black shadowy thing, at first from my peripheral vision, jump from a tree and duck behind a bush. And I'm like, did I just see that? And as we continued, it did this along the way, just scurrying along and hiding. And we reached our destination, turned around and come back, and it did that same thing all the way back to her house where I was staying temporarily. And by the time I reached her home, I was just beside myself. And being a cartoonist, I grabbed a piece of paper and I'm like, look, I don't know what I was just seeing, but I saw this thing, and I drew the head and shoulder looking shadow. And I'm thinking my friend is going to laugh her head off looking at my drawing, but instead she looks at it and goes, "Oh, that thing, I don't know. That thing's been following me since I was a kid." And I'm like, what? To get that and then get validation from her father, who looks at my drawing and goes, "Oh, is he back?" It was just incredible. And then I had to go upstairs and grab something. I was staying at their home, and I didn't turn the lights on because it's broad daylight. There's a lot of sunshine coming in. But it was a halfway completed attic where the room was. And I go in there, grab what I needed, turned around, and this thing was blocking my way out of the room. For something that seems so almost bashful or sneaky, to have it come at me confrontational manner like that was just, I don't even know how to describe that kind of fear. I don't think I've felt that kind of fear before that. So, and to say that I felt the evil is an understatement. I felt it wanted to kill me, and I felt it was angry. I saw it. It's almost as if something told me, don't run, don't swing at this thing. I just closed my eyes and started saying a prayer, and I walked slowly through this thing because I felt if I stayed there any longer, I was going to die or pass out. So that's how I made it through. So it really shook up my world to feel evil like that, and to have something so quickly validated was just mind-blowing. So, yeah.
I'm looking back on our own cases, and we always give you credit, Heidi. I've told you this before, for the term shadow people, which I guess now is a registered trademark.
Yes.
And I don't blame you. Because everybody, you really made a splash in the field in that. And I'm thinking back of. I think of these things as you probably know more about them than I do, but when I've run into them as archetypes, things that are buried in the human psyche, and that's how we see them, and that's how we label them. For example, twice I have seen the man in the checkered shirt, which is a sort of garden variety archetypal figure, once in Montreal, Canada, and once in Rhode Island here. I have run into the little blonde girl with flowers in her hair, and a number of what could be called shadow people in a number of different cases, and they always turned out to be what we refer to as parasites, which would tie right in with the evil nature of what you're saying. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. One of the strangest ones, of course, was the Bridgeport, the poltergeist affair of 1974. And when I came face to face with these things, and I was literally face to face with one, I was in the seminary at the time. There was a priest. We were considering these to be demons. Ed and Lorraine Warren, everything. These were demons. But that didn't seem good enough. There seemed to be an alienness about them. It wasn't necessarily evil. It was just completely other, totally lifeless in the sense of human life, although they were alive. And would this match some of the impressions that you have described in facing these things? I think people would, when they feel the sterility and the cold hostility, they would call it evil. I mean, and would that sort of match up with your experiences with these things?
I would say so. As far as the evil nature and having that alien feel connection to them, I would have never personally guessed that these creatures had anything to do with aliens. I mean, they seem so different. If anything, I would just think, paranormal hauntings type of stuff or demonic possessive type situations. But it was not until my college years that I came across another type of phenomena that I never would have suspected or expected when a more benevolent entity, an alien being, started speaking through my college roommate, who was extremely religious, that felt anything that wasn't in the Bible was just plain evil and don't talk about it around her. And this is where I learned what these shadow beings were, what Hat Man was. So a lot of people think it's just, me digging, trying to find something. I had no idea. This was information told to me and my college friend, and it was just so. It's like I wish that things weren't as deep and complicated as they can appear. I wish that people could put it into two different categories. It's like I know that there's so many different definitions, and I always say some things exist without a definition, and there's two piles: dark, light, good, bad. And because there's so many puzzles and so many things, I don't think that we'll ever get to all the answers. But it's fascinating. Some of the things, like yourself, you're able to pull in so much of your experience and say, I see where it all connects. And I'm finding it for myself, and to be able to express this as clearly as possible to people, it seems to simplify it and open their minds to understanding that sometimes you don't have to completely understand it all, that you can just categorize it one or two and and apply what's needed to take care of it, because it can be remedied in people's lives.
Yeah, well, I want to get into that too. But a couple of things you said were very interesting, especially the size of some of these shadow people. Now, we've run into them in parasite cases, and they're little. People actually turn around in their kitchen and see little shadow beings. But when you say 6 or 8 feet tall and red eyes, one thinks of Mothman. All right, the whole Mothman thing there. Would you say, at the risk of putting labels on things, there are a lot of alien things about Mothman. We use the term alien, we don't necessarily mean from other planets. In the classic sense. But what about would you say Mothman fit into this category because of the terror that he, she, or it inspired?
I really wouldn't be surprised, but if anything, I feel as if Mothman might fall into one of the minions that works for Hat Man, because there are several of them that do. So, and it's that menacing nature. It's more solid than like a shadow being shape-shifting. And you mentioning the small shadow people. So sometimes I of course, these things can morph. So, but generally, the head and shoulder looking one does tend to be rather large. And, but I've heard of smaller ones, but I often hear people describe these smaller ones as having a hood on with glowing red eyes. And those are an alien being who also are connected anyhow. So, but yeah, they can be smaller as well. But if they have a really definitive shape to them, it's more than likely something that works for Hat Man, and it seems so strange to think that there's some kind of hierarchy. I mean, is there honor among thieves?
We find that all the time. We find they have a culture, leadership, 8 or 9 different species. Yes. So tell us about Hat Man. He seems to be kind of at the top of the pyramid sometimes, and what kind of creature is this?
The big wig, if you will.
Yes,
he is a big wig.
Anyway.
Yes, he is. So he kind of looks like a guy that's wearing a 3-piece suit, trench coat or cape, wears different types of hats or no hat. He changes his suit sometimes. And God forbid if he smiles at you, because it's something like out of the Batman movies with the Joker. It's just ear to ear. And his teeth look like Pennywise from Stephen King's It. So... And he likes to talk. He likes to just instill such terror in people, and he enjoys it. He loves getting into people's personal space, getting within an inch of their face, and talking about what he wants to do to them and how he's going to have them do things for him. He'll say he's the devil himself. And, in the beginning, when I first put up his image on my website, that's been stolen all over the world. They just erased that lovely copyright symbol on it. I've seen tattoos on people. Oh, boy, wow. They're so ridiculous. So when I put that image up, I almost immediately so I had a website called UFO, the number 2, the letter U.com. So I had UFO2.com, a UFO website before most people had a website. And so I got all these emails about aliens and ghostly stuff. And I put up shadow people images. Everything turned to shadow people. And then I put the Hat Man. 99%, maybe around that, is now about Hat Man. So he's a dominating force out there for certain. And the consistency between the stories, it's what's so disturbing. But when people would write me, they're like, who is he? And they'd answer their own question. They're like, he's the devil, isn't he? Like, they just know that's what he is. And it's heartbreaking, especially when I get emails from children. Kids grabbing your cell phone aren't always playing games. They're looking things up, and they're finding me, saying, help me, my mommy doesn't believe me. I'm 8 years old. And
oh, boy.
I had so much difficulty with that, because once they tell you their age, you can't write them back. But being a cartoonist, I thought, I'm going to do a little kid's book that's also friendly for adults, because people were always asking me, how do you go about protecting yourself? And I drew it out in this book. The one that you named, I've renamed it to be called The Hat Man, How to Get Rid of Dark Beings for All Ages. So essentially, so it's book 2 of The Hat Man, trying to show people how to take care of these things. So now I could just say, I'm sorry to hear that, kiddo. Maybe mommy will love this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been heartbreaking, what's going on out there. But so Hat Man is, I believe I've discovered who he really is and what his name is.
Oh, okay.
Yes. The name is Ahriman. It's something that Rudolf Steiner had referred. And it's a crazy story. I mean, I had a friend who sent me this sculpted image, and I'm like, wow, who did a sculpture of Hat Man? That's pretty cool. And they're just like, excuse me? And I'm like, yeah, that's Hat Man. It's like, that's his original form. And they're like, Rudolf Steiner sculpted this 100 years ago. And he said 100 years from the time that he said this, somebody would find who he is. And, I mean, the goosebumps and having that name, I can't even tell you, just jumping up and down like, I found you. I know who you are. But yeah, so he is, something that the anthroposophy, discusses, and and they refer to him as the devil. So I was like, well, yeah, that's what he is. I'm just blown away, by that, but it definitely is. And I've had people from the, anthroposophy studies say it does appear you found him. So I'm blown away.
One question is, how far back do these stories go? I mean, some of these, you talk to the Aboriginals and you got stories back to the Ice Age or before that. Yeah. This is not an internet phenomenon like Slender Man, is it?
No, I mean, when you think about
100 years ago, you referred to the sculpture, yeah.
Right, yeah. So it's like, evil's been spoken of since the beginning of time, hasn't it? I mean,
sure.
I think it's taken different forms. And it's funny because I've never been one to really stop, drop, and dig into history on it. And some people, I've had a handful of people over the years go, oh, you got that from the natives. Oh, you got that from this. And I'm like, I didn't get it from anywhere but the aliens. When they spoke of it, I called them shadow people myself for years, and many others have reached out to me over the years also saying, when I was a kid, I called them shadow people too. I'm like, yay, I'm sure there's others too, but, yeah, it's been a wild time because, all I know is how to be true to what it is that I know, what I agreed to talk about, in this lifetime, and just keep going forward. It's like digging in history is cool, but things are speeding up so fast right now, and there's so many difficulties going on with these creatures. There's really no time to waste on history when the present is a hot mess.
Yeah, no, you're right. The issue too of a personal devil can be problematic, even in theology. Linguistically, what do you mean, and all this, and it's not as clear as some people might think it is. But as far as so that leads to the question: the Hat Man. When someone has a Hat Man experience, how do you know it really is the Hat Man? It might be some parasite pretending to be, because they're mimics in nature, and that's what they tend to do. So I don't know, how is there really a Hat Man?
Yeah, there is, and it's very much like, well, is it him or is it not? I'm like, what happened? How did your soul feel when you were in the presence of it? It's like I felt like my soul was at risk. The things that it said and the things that it did and the way that it comes at me regularly or whatnot. So that's the things that I look at more than trying to define it specifically. Because if it's evil, it doesn't matter. It needs to be dealt with. So when it comes to the situations that people usually describe, Hat Man does tend to come at night, but he does come during the daytime as well. So, but he prefers when we're at our weakest. He's a coward in that way, and it tries to take on humankind when they're asleep and then paralyzed. Like, woo, what big man, So, and going after children. So it really angers me, the stuff that goes on. But, so he'll paralyze people. He'll give them nightmares even, very specific. And imagine having like the worst nightmare of seeing this thing, laughing or torturing you, and you wake up and he's in your room. So you didn't even leave your nightmare because he's there laughing about it. And some of these people, they get within an inch of their lives, they feel, because they just can't take the horror anymore. And he'll bite, he'll punch, he'll scratch, and he rapes them physically. Doesn't matter if it's you're a male or a female, because anything that could create a feeling of terror, horror, and taking over your power. And then oftentimes, well, I don't know how often I should say, but a lot of times I get these emails of people saying, I was just like, just kill me already. And when I said that, he reached into their chest and pulled their soul out and was dragging them, saying, I've got you now. Now you're mine. Like they gave up. And until they call out to God or Jesus help them, were they able to make it back to their body. And these are the desperate emails that I get, all caps, please help. I can't go back to sleep. He's going to grab me again. Type of emails. So it's like, how can, a lot of people are like, oh, you should really be charging for your services. I'm like, what's the price of a soul? But please help. I don't charge to help these people. And it's like, and I'm not a psychic. I'm not a guru. I'm just somebody who's been through a lot in regards to these things. And I remember before I was born that I said I'd work on these things to try to help. I just didn't realize how bad the situation was already when I first spoke of Shadow People Hat Man on Coast to Coast so many years ago. It was just amazing. And now I wrote my book, The Secret War book, that first introduces the topic of shadow people in 1997. And it took me 4 years to get that published, but it was written in 2 months. And it was spread out all throughout the community of people that were writing books and researching on paranormal and UFOs, because those were only people who published books like that back then. So it was really disheartening to have to wait as long as I did to finally get to talk about it out in the public. But it was definitely being spoken of behind closed doors. But it's really a relief to be able to reach the people that I am right now and try to offer help when and where I can.
Well, we want to get into how to get rid of this sort of thing and some more about maybe its ontology. But in the meantime, we have a couple of questions from listeners. But I think before that, we're going to take our mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM. In New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley with our wonderful guest today and our old friend Heidi Hollis. We'll be right back.
the night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
And welcome back to WOON and Behind the Paranormal here on 99.5 FM and 1240 AM. We have some questions from listeners for our guest Heidi Hollis. Ben, you don't know it yet, but you have one under your pile there from Peter in South America.
Cleverly hidden, of course.
Who always sends in great questions.
And there we are.
Yeah, there are several questions, so take it away.
Now that the public didn't get to see me rifling through papers. Hi, Paul. Please ask Heidi if there's any physical evidence in cases of Hat Man and his shadow relations. With UFOs, we have radar data, landing traces, Bigfoot foot impressions. Do we have anything that is equivalent?
Oh, goodness. To have something tangible like that, I haven't come across anything outside of photos and video of him showing up. And some of it is pretty impressive, to be honest. I mean, so no, I can't say. I mean, it's pretty much along the lines of those who do ghost hunting, because he does show up around haunted locations, and there's a reason for that as well. But yeah, so it's kind of along those lines of more of the different EMF readings and the cold chills and along those lines.
Okie dokie. So Peter has a comment and then asks for your comments on said comment. So let's read the comment. In your podcasts, you repeatedly state that calling on Jesus is effective in making shadow species go poof. However, this technique has been described as not working by alleged victims of phenomena. For example, Nadine Lalich on Paul's show. I imagine Paul himself tried that before using a Brother Juniper joke book. Comments?
That's a long story, Heidi. I'll have to explain it off the air.
I'm like, what was that? My show, since I mentioned the podcast, it's called Dark Becomes Light. It's on iHeartRadio and Coast to Coast AM Paranormal Podcast Network. And what I do is I take people's emails and I read them and try to give some helpful insight. And I also welcome people to come on the show to discuss what it is that they've experienced. I've had people that have told me, I said, Jesus help me, and all these different things, and nothing worked. And, and I've had rather deep conversations with some of these people that say that. And I'm not God. I can't say, well, you didn't have the right amount of faith for that. But I don't know what, from my understanding, some of these people have given up a lot as far as what they believe in. And it's almost like a sprinkling of a recipe. I sprinkled a little bit of this, I threw that, and mixed it, and it just didn't pop out right. So I can't tell you what's the reasoning behind some of these folks and some of these very, very rare situations that I've personally come across that tell me, well, I tried that, didn't work, so give me something else, But and those people generally will tell me too. I don't get into that religious thing, but I said that God, I went down the list. So, and I keep thinking of that movie. It was at Salem's Lot or something, where the guy held up the cross up to the vampire, and the vampire grabbed it out of his hand and said, "You got to have faith for that to work." I don't know if that's the right movie, but I mean, that scene pops into my head over and over again. I'm like, well, was something lacking? I don't know. All I could tell you is, like, in most of the cases I come across, when being met with something so evil, it does work. And sometimes, they're having to say it a couple of times and bless their space. But, I mean, I've been now talking about this stuff for over 20 years, and it's been only a handful that describe, well, gee, that just didn't happen. Didn't work.
Well, yeah, there have been issues in my history during exorcisms and stuff. I was just assisting. I wasn't performing. It was priest work. Didn't always work. All right. I have seen, I in my personal opinion, you shouldn't go into a Muslim home or a Hindu home. And America's full of all kinds of different people now. Not everybody's a Christian. And it's just... And what did Jesus say in the Gospels? If you read it in Greek instead of the horrendous English translation, your faith has made you well. Whenever he performed the miracle, he never took credit for it himself. The person shared in the miracle. And that there were times when he couldn't do miracles, particularly in Nazareth, that sort of thing, which is interesting because Nazareth probably wasn't built till the 3rd century AD. But anyway, the issue is one of a faith. And I have seen the name of ISIS make them scatter. So I mean, I think there's a certain, and I'm by no means a relativist, but I think that you have to take people where they are because that's what God does. So anyway, but be that as it may, before we get into another question from one of the listeners, I was astonished in researching the Mothman phenomena years ago that they would sometimes be, not often, but be positive. For example, there would be people who'd say, well, I encountered it and I got better in math and things, my life really improved just, by being in the presence of Mothman. Whereas, 90% of the people were utterly terrified and had miserable experiences. So, that leads into a question. Have you ever heard, not necessarily with Hat Man, but with shadow beings, what people put that label on as being a positive experience or one in which, so tell us about that.
Yeah, I have. And, and I'm finding people are posting about these things too and writing to me as well. Like, well, my experiences weren't like that, or I wasn't afraid of him, so if he must be decent. He's like my guardian. And when I've talked to some of these folks, I'm like, what makes you say that? It's like, well, he's guarding my bed at night, I'm like, oh, because he's pacing the floor and he hasn't attacked you yet. Okay, got it. Other times it's been, he punched my abusive dad for me. What? Okay, so that was a favor. I'm like, so now you owe him. I think he builds up confidence. These things build up confidence sometimes in these people to let their guard down. They get comfortable with his presence. I've had people who grew up with Hat Man or Shadow People, and so they're used to the presence, and then they turn 18 or, they get older, and then he starts the abuse. They're very, very patient. And the way that they go, I'm like, well, look, he's observing you at night. He's not guarding you. He's looking for a way in, and luckily he hasn't found it yet. But trust me, at some point, if he's that close to you all these years, it's just a matter of time. So it's disturbing to me because it's a grooming, like a pedophile. It is.
Yeah, I think that's a good description. Yeah.
It really is. And I'm like, hold on. I'm like, so the kid agrees at the age of 15 and you've been grooming them since they were 5 years old. Now the kid is complacent, so they're guilty? No. I think people misinterpret what's going on with the going on. I mean, I had a situation where I had a bunch of grays in my apartment. And I couldn't understand. I grabbed my little photo booklet from one of their hands, and only to go into my bathroom to see this one of the grays shapeshift to appear like my nephew that was in that photo album. So they were gathering information to confuse me. I don't know. It's like, but you gotta wonder what's the gathering of information? Why are they observing? Why are they all around? So there's a process behind all of it, and there's no matter what people say out there when it comes to the alien situation too. Like I have a lot of background on the topic of UFOs, aliens, ghostly phenomena because I've gone through all of it, near-death experience, holy encounters. And, there's this notion out there that, well, these aliens didn't cross the universe just to come and be horrible to us. Like, it's all love and light. And no, it's not. It's not. And there's an association between these beings, these darker beings, and what's going on with these alien abductions, alien interactions, and why they're seen right alongside of them. If you see the image of Ahriman, which is on my website, shadowfolks.com, you'll see that he looks very much like an alien.
Yeah. One of the points I did want to ask you about before we get into another question is essentially the notion of tulpas or thought forms, which are well known in Tibetan Buddhism, and it sort of bleeds into some of the theories about poltergeist, that someone in distress will have energy that comes out and essentially will form one of these entities. In our experience, these are things that that activity rings the dinner bell for parasites, and they come and assume the form that you will be most responsive to. That kind of, but regardless of how it happens, is it possible that some of these are not actual independent entities, but are created by, or at least share the life of, the person who is experiencing the horror here?
I get a lot of thoughts in regards to perhaps, because you put these images out there, people are experiencing this more. They think they are. And I'm like, almost weekly, I get an email saying, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
So it's like, are we really creating something that just so happens to wear a suit and a hat and are horrified that 40 years later, this lady's out here talking about this? I think that there are definitely situations where people are conjuring up things. I think a lot of, because the human potential is something else. We've got a lot of abilities that we're not tapping into, then we accidentally do, and we're like, whoa, what was that? And I think there's really something to be said about who we really are, if we could only remember. And the same beings that told me about Shadow People Hat Man said, there's no time to learn, it's about remembering. So we can tap into these things to protect ourselves. And and speaking of tulpas, I think that definitely we have the ability to create such a thing. I don't know necessarily if that's always what's going on with these things. All I know is that right now we have to be on our toes and be prepared to handle the onslaught, because it's big and bad, and it's as awful as you can imagine, and it's just feeding on this pandemic and all the fear.
Yeah, all the negativity out there, you're absolutely right.
Oppression, possession
Terrible.
Is through the roof, and they're having a field day. We have to be on top of it.
Well, here's a question from Phil. Phil is one of our show reporters in the middle of the always hopping Litchfield, Connecticut triangle, and Phil has a question. You kind of answered this already, Heidi, but maybe you'd like to comment further.
Sure.
Okie dokie. Phil writes to us, in your research, have you found any time when the Hat Man said anything audible to a person? He seems to instill intense fear in people, but has there ever been a message, either telepathic or by sound?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, as you said, you mentioned that, but...
Yes, he'll put impressions into people's minds, bad dreams, bad thoughts. He's like that thing whispering in your ear, do this, take a left, not a right. He doesn't always create the problems that are going on, but he can manipulate you. He can manipulate others to create a traffic jam for you, an accident for you. He's about everything that you can imagine to create problems. He's able to encourage that, and who's ever listening to him, unfortunately, has a problem and needs to better protect themselves, actually. So, yeah, he could create all sorts of stuff.
Okay. So if you're a victim of this already, how do you get rid of it, and how do you avoid becoming a victim in the first place?
Well, for myself, I don't know if you could see, but I always wear my I always wear a cross. So I use this cross to bless my space, and I have a certain method that I do to bless my space, and it's like, I'm not native. I don't use sage. I don't, I'm Christian, so I'll use holy water or spring water that I've had in the sunlight for a couple hours, and I go through and I methodically get every corner and every space saying a prayer around and move it out, and then I keep this blessing with me by the cross that I use to bless the home. I keep it on me because wherever I go, these things have a potential to come at me, and I'm an occupational therapist. I work with those that have psychological to cognitive to physical dysfunction, and I try to help them to become more independent. So using those skills have been really helpful in this field. But I've had the Hat Men go after patients of mine. I've had things speak through my patients at me. So I have to keep my protection with me because there's no limit to where they try to access where you're at. And but you know what? So many times people have written me and they're like, I've been meaning to write you for a year now, but every time I think to, I could feel the anger of these things around me that I'm going to reach out to you. And I'm like, good. Take it as a compliment because they know their time is short. Because, we got to take this stuff on head on.
Yeah. Let's take a moment to talk about your books and your website.
Yes.
Anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah. So my podcast, Dark Becomes Light, as I mentioned, on iHeart, and it's part of Coast to Coast AM's new paranormal podcast network. Mm-hmm. And I welcome anybody to write me through my website, shadowfolks.com or HeidiHollis.com. Write as much detail as you'd like about whatever it is that you've experienced, from angels to aliens to shadow people to Hat Man, and just to have a conversation about these things and keeping it real and on the level. My books, the Secret War book is the first one discussing the conflict in alien contact and the connection with shadow people and my experiences with alien beings that introduced these topics to me. And the Hat Man books, I have two of them. One of them is telling about the whole phenomena. And then I have the Hat Man, the one that illustrates how to keep these dark things away. Being Christian, having these people always writing me saying, okay, first, I don't get into this religious stuff, but the devil came at me. What do I do? I'm like, okay, you're acknowledging the devil, but you won't acknowledge, the positive. I mean, so I felt like I was always trying to get people to say, oh, the mustard seed, the size of a mustard seed faith. So I have a website called The Other F Word for faith. I did a book for kids, being a cartoonist, kind of like in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid like style. And I had all these adults writing me saying, great, thanks. So I decided to do an adult version with comics and everything. So The Other F Word, how to find faith and laugh at yourself while trying. Anything to try to get people to wake up. And I've also had Jesus encounters, and it's actually my highest rated book called Jesus is No Joke. I would have never expected to have encounters with him. I was a huge skeptic of such things, only to be met with him. And I'm all about being as painfully honest as I can about whatever it is I experience. And I have several books on these topics that's just kind of pulling a whole picture together, I hope, that helps people find a path to just build themselves up to be able to take these things on and not question, have no doubts that you can indeed do this. And with faith, I mean, I feel like you could go a long way with that. So no limits. But yeah. So and I'm a cartoonist. I do a paranormal comic. So it's at the Outlanders Comic on Instagram. So feel free to check it out.
Okay, very good.
Oh Ben? Yes, you looked at me, and I think I'm.
You've been stewing the whole show here.
No, I'm not so much stewing. My brain is slow today, and so it's taking a little to rev up. I think it's really interesting. This whole conversation, just kind of listening to it and trying to gather my thoughts while also listening to it. There's two things that pop into my head. One, I do think it's interesting that what you just said, Holly, about I don't believe any of this religious stuff, but I ran into the devil, and the first thing I thought of was Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. His last sprawling great work. If you've never read it, Russian existentialism is something else, that's for sure. It's really great. But there's a really interesting one of the three brothers Karamazov. He's a Moscow intellectual in the late 1800s. He's an atheist, but he ends up getting this old timey disease called brain fever. The plot is very confusing, so I'm just going to summarize it very quickly. He while he's very ill, he has delusions, and in these delusions, he's talking with a man in a shabby suit, and he's basically trying to convince him that he's the devil, and that's like his whole thing. He's trying to convince this brother that oh yeah, I'm the devil and I'm here. He's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like if I was to believe in God, why wouldn't I just be convinced to believe in God? And he was like, well, I win if I convince you I'm the devil. And he was like, that's really the whole thing is, it's one, he's like, because if you believe in me, that means you believe in God, which as an atheist, that means he loses. And so it's like, it's a whole, like, intellectual metaphor on how one deals with rationality and materialism. And I think one of the really interesting things about that, as this leads into my next point, is we as good old modern Americans in the modern world, we believe in the magic, the mystery of science, and the wonderful things that come along with it. Which, not to knock it, a lot of great things come from it. Medicine. We have wonderful technologies. We literally have the world in the palm of our hand. But with that comes this whole. We had to trade a lot of stuff to get there, right? So our worldview is based on this very flat, surface, thanks to Hegel, where we bring everything and we shove it into the material world, and this is what we got, right? We have we can logically and use reason and know that we're sitting here in this room, and there are two mics in front of us, and there's a computer there that has Skype, which has you coming in from a real place that we can kind of guess where it is, but we really don't know. It's how we experience the world now is breaking for a lot of people. It's not working, and it hasn't really worked, right? But we like to convince ourselves that we have, because the key word is control. We like to be able to control our surroundings. We like to be able to think that we have control, and we will do anything to do it, because we as humans have always wanted to do that. We've always wanted to have powers over the world, and we've wanted to have our control over it. That's why we built sort of this whole place. That's why we have time. That's why time is a thing, because we've tried to control it. And now that we're in this very odd space where we have this horrifying set of world events that we're all participating in at the same time, we're getting to a point where things are just kind of falling apart, and a lot of the people that we trusted don't have the answers, because our worldview doesn't allow for anything that's outside of the material world. Even us as, I'm not going to say religious, faithful people, we will say that. We see the world with two sets of glasses. We have faith glasses, and then we have regular world glasses. And that's how we see the world. And it's like, okay, well, this is this is that. We separate them, and this is how we acknowledge it. And as much as we try to not and see everything as a whole, it's very hard to do, because we've been conditioned and trained like that for good 1,000 years or so, and our philosophy and our culture reflects that, right? Everything is compartmentalized. Nothing interacts with anything else. It's like, okay, well, we'll look at government. The president is separate from Congress and the Senate. It's just they're all separate things, and they all do their own things, and it's just not that way, right? We don't see the world as a whole. So now there are all these people writing to you because they can't get answers from normal people. I'm not going to say normal. They can't get answers from. I didn't mean to insult you. That came across insulting.
I got you. It's like they go to their church, and I'm getting these people that try to seek help from their church, and they're being turned away and saying, well, if you join my church, or if you donate money, I've literally got these emails, maybe we'll go and try to help you out. It's a shame, and all these things are connected, and we feel it. We totally feel it, whether we put a label to it or not and say this is faith-based stuff or what. And it's like I always tell people, I have my Christian belief. I'm not a church-going person, but I can't deny what I've experienced and seen for myself, as far as the Jesus encounters and all these other types of encounters too. So it's like I'm just I'm just trying to be realistic that there's a reason why our calendars are set to the time that Christ died. There's a reason behind a lot of things and why we keep certain patterns, because there's a lot of things that are so real it's hard to discredit it. Why are we holding on to these things that we do? And why is this thing? We talk about something being evil, and it's like, well, that doesn't seem right. I could feel this chair underneath me. Where's that tangible evidence to show Hat Man is real? This is what drives people underground that fought for their lives through the night, and they got to get up and pretend like it didn't happen. And they're absolutely, suffering. PTSD, they've been violated, they've been brutalized. I mean, Hat Man will throw you across the room and beat you to a pulp. Hey, you got to straighten up and pretend it didn't happen. I got thousands of these emails over the years. I got thousands the first night I spoke of them. And I did a TV show, and they asked me, how many of these cases have you had? I'm like, thousands. They dubbed me to say, Miss Hollis has seen dozens and dozens. No. In a week, maybe. This is real, but the media downplays it. People downplay it. But we're living in this reality, and we don't think about this reality until somebody we love dies. And we're like, where'd they go? Or their pet dies. Where'd they go? Where's that inner them? Did it just cease to exist? Heck no. We know that. We know there's something more to the skin that we're walking around in. So we have to start contemplating these things now, because these things are placing their bets on us not to figure them out. This is a real problem. It's no time to waste to say, give me that piece of proof. It's like your piece of proof is people are suffering. Trust your neighbor. If their voice can put you to prison for the rest of your life, you should believe that their voice means something, even officially. But we're going to discredit them because, well, I didn't see it. Well, you didn't see the crime they witnessed either, but they could put you to jail for it. It's like we just got to stop with this. These are real things going on to real people who are truly suffering in silence, because we're so easy to laugh about it. But now, we talk about UFOs. Oh, those weirdos see those. Well, now we see more officially now that the government's been in on it. I know I was interrogated while I was in college by government people wanting to know about UFOs, but who could I tell? Who would believe that? Only to learn years later there's something called military abductions, MyLabs, and then to find that people in my family were well aware of all of this stuff. So what we're calling not to be real is absolutely real, and there's many people who are aware of it, but they're hiding these things because of us and because of those who want to keep the power, keep it silent. Enough is enough. It really is.
Well, there we have it. Heidi, we're out of time. We have plenty more questions, but we'll do another show soon.
Awesome.
And thank you so much.
Thank you,
keep up
guys.
the great work.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So let's move on to our announcements. Ben, if you would be so kind.
Sure. So on Tuesday, September 21st, my dad will present a program on UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts via Zoom to Mainline MUFON in Philadelphia. You can check out Mainline MUFON. That's MANLINEMUFON.com.
On Friday, October 8th, I'll present a paranormal overview at a somewhat unlikely venue, the Arizona Dowsers Conference at the Little America Hotel in Flagstaff. Visit dowserssouthwest.com for more information.
And we'll present once again at the Western Connecticut UFO Conference during the last week of October this year. On Sunday, the 24th, we'll do a live simulcast with the conference. This will be an open line show format with Kathleen Martin taking questions from conference participants and our global audience on the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, which 2021 is the 60th anniversary. On the following Saturday, COVID variants permitting, we'll present live at the Danbury, Connecticut Public Library to wrap up the conference. Other presenters that week will include Mark D'Antonio, Tom Reed, Michael Scratt, Linda Zimmerman, Mike Panicello from Connecticut MUFON.
After years of tech problems, all regular recorded radio broadcasts of this show, Behind the Paranormal, from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio and here on WON AM and FM have been restored in the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com. Also fully restored are the Return to Rendlesham series from 2010 to 2011 on CBS and all related shows, along with the Achieve Radio monthly 2-hour specials from 2009. So check that all out at BehindTheParanormal.com. Also, many of those are on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So, we, I guess, ought to be moving on here. Don't forget our show has its own app. You can get that soon in the stores, online stores, but there's a link at BehindTheParanormal.com if you'd like to download it now. It's simple, but it'll give you all the shows that have recently been broadcast.
Indeed, and don't forget about our website, which we've mentioned multiple times, but you can also get our books on there, and those of our guest co-hosts, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can also find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us, along with all of those shows we mentioned earlier, and more.
So next week, we have, that'll be August 15th, we'll welcome back the legendary John Zaffis, nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren, to talk about some of his weirdest ghost cases. And we leave you today with a sobering thought from our guest, Heidi Hollis herself. To me, it feels like the dark side is placing bets on us not to figure them out. Unquote. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on this new wild ride. And join us again next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.